Okay, so for the second half of this, we're going to go through an actual production example. And so what I picked for production by production, I don't really mean production, I mean I put together a full program that does something non-trivial. And I actually decided to do a writing poetry recognizer. Right? And so, and it's kind of a hack. If you were really doing this, you'd have to do more work than I did. But I probably still did too much, for this one class. So let's take a look. So I called it Rhyme. So let's take a look at it. We have two poems here. This is a limerick, and then we have a sonnet. I didn't write either of these. That's Shakespeare and that's Anonymous. Actually, I think the second one might be Isaac Asimov, who read a very large number of limericks in his life, God rest his rather sexually harassing soul. So here's the thing. How can I tell, how would I go around telling if whether something's a limerick or something's a sonnet? I'm sorry, that's a rhetorical question here. So the thing is, well, what makes a poem work? Well, what makes a limerick work? Well, let's take a look at this. Anatomical, economical, and comical all rhyme. Plus, and so does seen and clean. Plus the lengths. There's a certain number of syllables that you're allowed. Now, in fact, there's more than this. You need stresses have to be correct in poems, particularly sonnets. Other one. I didn't do stresses and things because I was something that we're talking like days of work as opposed to an hour or two of work. So I said, okay, let's just stop there. Let's say the following: that I know a poem is a sonnet if it has so many X number of syllables on given lines, and lines 1 and 3, 2 and 4. 5 and 7, 6 and 8, etc. rhyme. So I'm just basically saying, okay, I'm going to define the rhyme scheme from poetry based on the number of syllables per line and the rhyming word at the end of the line. So it's kind of a simplification, but you always find when you're doing any program thing, you have to stop at some point and do make a simplification. I should also add that there's I'm going to take a quick diversion and do a plug for this concept of what's called agile programming. Agile programming, and a terrible name really. It's also called extreme programming, which is an even worse name for it. It makes it seem like you're going to No, what it means is actually it should really be called lazy programming or slack programming, because what you do is you try and do the minimum amount possible at each stage. You don't design for the future. Unless you have it spec'd out, unless you know exactly what it is. Instead, you do the least amount you can and get it fully working. And then you have tiny increments. Particularly for you who's interested in teaching people, in actually managing people, Agile and its variations called Scrum and things will be your best friends. Because one of the big troubles with programming is you probably know if you start something, if you say it'll take you an hour and it takes you a week. All the time. And if you're doing tiny iterations, if you're doing things where you make, okay, I'm going to make a tiny bit of progress and then stamp it, and then keep doing this, you can see, if you estimate that this thing's going to take you a day, this tiny step, and it takes you a week, you know that you should be multiplying all your estimates by 5. However, if you estimate the first step is going to take you a month, and it took you 5 months, by the time you figured out you were in a bad state, you'd already be screwed for the camera there. Keeping the thing down. So the idea of agile or programming is that you have tiny iterations. You get through that iteration and then you say, okay, that's done. I'm going to make sure that works. We go on to the next. I believe it's the only way to work. So, and what that means though is a lot of times you have to make a compromise early on. You say, okay, we're going to do this simple thing first, and then we'll get that to work, and then we'll try the more complicated cases. That is the way to go every time. Don't try and do the world, and I make this mistake all the time. I'm dealing with this right now in some of the projects where I did this to myself. And I know better, I have no excuse, but after this class you will have no excuse either. Tiny bite-sized things. So in this case, I cut off with just two simple things to define a poem is the number of syllables per line and the rhyme schemes at the end of the line. So then, I'm kind of going through my development process here. I said, okay, first, how do I find out if two words rhyme? Well, I can't. I can't just by looking at them. right? So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to create a table of rhymes, now, in the case of this, what I did was, I made a table here, and basically each line just has a list of words that rhymes. That's it, it's a file. If you remember, we learned how to read files the other day. You can tell I just picked the words that rhyme from the example poems I had. So I know it's going to work, but what would happen in practice is, there exist online rhyming dictionaries, huge rhyming dictionaries. You would load these into your program somehow. And I just made up this data format here, and don't worry about it, you'll be on camera here.
Very sorry.
Okay. No trouble. Just don't knock over the wires. So I just made up this dictionary. Again, this is something I did, again, because of the extreme programming, or agile, I've got to stop calling it extreme, is I just said, look, I'm going to make this simple format here, and then maybe later on, when I have bigger needs, I'm going to do that, going to do those. But this is very good for getting a demo. So there's my rhyming dictionary. Each line is a set of words that all rhyme. Okay, so let's start with that. So now at least I have a definition of a rhyme. 2 words rhyme if they are on the same line in this file. I mean, that's not a full definition, but it'll work for our purposes. Great. So then the next thing I did is I said, okay, now let's take this and let's turn this into a program. And we made a module, and this module is called rhymes.txt, right? So, and that's true. Sorry, let's start off. So, no, let me not jump ahead of here. So I'm doing it along the lines of where I wrote it. So right away you start off with an import text. And you saw, I was like, I have to jump to that. Why? What is that? Well, that is something I wrote. That is another module I wrote myself. And the reason I did it is I realized even before I dealt with rhymes, I had to deal with splitting words up. You're like, well, wait a second. We already know how to split words up. We have split, right? Well, the trouble with that is, if you look at one of these poems, there's several things that are a little bit iffy here. Split, we'll just split things up into shall with an uppercase S, day with a question mark. We don't want those, we don't want the punctuation. We don't want the uppercase. We want everything to be, because, like for example, May, here I have May spelled with a capital M. In that list, it's a lowercase. So we want to make everything as generic as possible, everything as simple as possible. So early on in this process, I realized, even just splitting lines up is going to take me some work here. So I ended up writing this little thing here, very small. And you can see that I hope is all of my intention here is very, very clear. I first started saying, I want to get rid of punctuation. So I call the variable punctuation. Very straightforward. And now I have, and this is I initially don't know I'll divide this up. I thought, no, I want to show you how people actually do this. And you notice this isn't a very long line. So, and plus you can download this. This is all up on GitHub. You can download this and play with this it's all, you're all happy with this. Let's go through this a bit at a time here. So here we have a function. And now, which you're much more familiar with as of today, it's got one argument, sentence. So that makes it very clear. We're splitting a sentence. It's a bit more typing. You see a lot of times it'll be split S. Yeah, but what's S? I'm reading this, I don't know. Remember, code you write, if it's useful, I probably said this before, but I should say it a million times, it's written once and read 10 times. It's probably written once and read 50 times. Even yourself, when you're reading it, you're debugging, you're reading it much more than you write it. So it's worth taking that little bit of extra time to name everything properly, because you'll thank yourself for it in 2 weeks when you try and figure out what you were thinking. Right? So here it's very clear, and this also reads like English. Look, punctuation is this. I could have just put those in there. You can stick around. I could have just put those in there, but then you'd be like, oh, okay, what's going on? That makes it very clear what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking there. So and then when somebody later on comes along and looks at this and says, oh, you forgot the dash. They can put it in there. They put it in, and it's very obvious. And it's obvious how they know what it is. So going back to here, we start. Remember, this is a generator. Remember, the generators are the things that allow you to do the equivalent of a loop and put it into a list immediately. So generally, generators you end up reading them from like Hebrew from right to left. So let's take a look at how this one works. So we start off sentence.split. Now, I didn't do that in class, but it was covered in one of the exercises. If you do a split with nothing in it, it splits it on white space. Spaces, but it also splits things on carriage returns, on tabs, not you've ever run into, on line feeds, on all sorts of other things. It turns out there's other spaces in the world, like Chinese characters have 2 different sorts of spaces. Who knew? But so this will handle all of that. You don't have to worry about that. It'll split this up. So sentence.split is basically all the words in the sentence. But if you remember, as I showed you in my example, the words aren't going to be sorry. The words aren't going to be, they'll be uppercase. Pointing on my screen doesn't work, right? They'll be uppercase. They'll contain question marks and this sort of thing is. So I've now got these things split up with the punctuation. So I want to clear out that punctuation. So it's a new command, which you haven't seen, but you could have found out by taking a look at the documentation for strings. Strip strips off strings that match strings that are contained in there from the front and the back of a string. So in other words, it's a way to get rid of things from the front or back of a string you don't want. Well, that seems very specialized. You use it all the time, just like here. You're constantly doing something, you break things up into components, say, okay, throw away the punctuation. Or you break things up into lines, throw away the spaces, throw away the indentation. Strip's really, really useful for that. You don't want something that gets rid of all the spaces, like one of the things I do earlier, somewhere else is I do, perhaps I'm not doing that anymore, but if I wanted to get this line, you see there are spaces in front of it, I just pasted this from a line and put the spaces in. If I wanted to just get that line without the space again I do strip. So strip is just a way to strip things from both the front and the back. It's terribly useful. And again, you don't have to memorize this. It's kind of a guided tour along these lines, and you have more chance to play around with this in the thing. So here we remember that this split things into word-like chunks, perhaps with punctuation and upper and lower case. Then remember this is a generator, so I'm saying for each word, and that should have been W, poor choice, W for word, or even word, but you'll forgive me. So for each one of these, now I take that word here, I strip the punctuation out of it from the front and back, and then dot lower. That should be pretty obvious, it's lowercase. So in other words, that's going to end up here. If you take a look at that first line there, it's going to end up with lowercase shall, lowercase I, compare thee to a summer's day, no question mark. Each of these separately. Does that make sense? Questions? Somebody's got a question then, you're not all, yeah.
Can you explain again how come the lower blank makes it obvious that it's making everything lowercase?
Oh, it's not obvious, but it turns out that string has a ton of useful functions on it. All the stuff that you would want to have, capitalized, lowercase, if you just do lower, uppercase, are all in there. So it's not that obvious, but now I've told you it is obvious. Who would ask first, and then I'll get
okay,
you.
so, oh yeah, I see. In punctuation, you're going to put the apostrophe. That's why I would give you summers. You said it would give you summers.
In fact, it doesn't. Remember, that's a very good question. In fact, that's not right though. Remember, strip only works at the front and the back of a string. So summers does end up in there, summers, but luckily it works out because I cheated. I put that in as a separate word. If you were doing more work on this thing, you would pull off those things as well. There'd be somewhat more work to say, oh, get rid of contractions, that sort of thing. John.
I was just noticing that you have like 2 methods called on the same same word essentially.
Oh, that's very true. Very, very true. That's it.
So are you saying that you can call method on top of method on top of method?
Absolutely. And that's a that's a really good question. In fact, it's the sort of thing just seems obvious to me, and is not obvious. It's clear, not obvious at all. And again, you can just work this through like it's an English sentence. This one actually goes from left to right. So remember, S is going through all of those chunks surrounded by spaces. Then I take that S, which is some string, and I strip the punctuation from the left and right. That gives me another string, So that string also has methods. That gives me a new string. And then I take that one and I lowercase that, which gives me yet another string. You find yourself doing this quite a bit. Now, you could do this, when you're doing this in your own work and exercises, this might be 5 lines, because you haven't got used to generators and things. That's fine, as long as it works. I'm showing you kind of the best, this is the kind of idiomatic way to do it. And once you get going at this, what you'll do is you'll write it the long way, you'll get it to work, and then you're like, can I make this a generator? It's always good, as I said in the very first thing where I gave you a list of things, is clean up after yourself. Write it the way you understand and then say, okay, maybe I can make this a generator. And if you start by making it a generator, you get it wrong, you feel bad, you get into the state of non-control, it's not good. But if you start doing it the long way and then you try and change it to a generator, you fail, you can always back out of it. And you can always back out of it because you will be using version control. You will be actually keeping, hopefully at some point I'll get to give you a lesson on this, how to do the right workflow. It's in the list, but I keep pushing it back, unfortunately. Let me not discourse too much and just say, this is kind of the way an idiomatic Python program would do it. You might end up having a bunch of lines to do this, that's fine. You don't pay extra for those lines. Maybe it's a bit slower, but did you have a question? Oh, you're just scratching your nose. I'm way over optimistic there. Okay, so so we have this. So this basically splits a sentence up into lowercase word chunks with no punctuation beginning or end. Great. And then I realized, oh, I'm actually kind of I do care about that, but I also care about the last word in the sentence. So I created another thing here. This is very little extra work. It just makes my life a tiny bit easier, and it makes other code easy to read. This is, again, is poor choice. Poor choice. Slap on the head for me. Last word. I should have called this last word. I'll go home and fix it so you'll never get to see that thing again. This takes the last word of a sentence. If I tried to do this really fast, I would have actually documented this if it's production code. It would say what it did, so that next 2 weeks later when I come back, I can remember what I possibly did. So, but even better is you can avoid writing documentation, a lot of it, if you name everything properly. I should have called this last word, then it would be clear. But that's what this does. It returns the last word, and it's pretty straightforward. It splits the sentence up into the component pieces using that function we just wrote, and then takes the last element. So here's a question is, what happens if there is no sentence, a tiny sentence? I'm going to split it, and it's going to get an empty list, and what's going to happen there? Who's got the thing? Me. You do. Oh, it's yours. So what's going to happen? Supposing I passed an empty sentence in.
I have no idea.
Well, let's go through it. I get an empty sentence, I split it, what do I get? I get like it's an empty string, and I do the split. What do I get?
You get an empty string.
I get an empty list. Remember, split is a list. I get an empty list, and I do all this processing on everything in the list, but there's nothing in the list, so it returns an empty list, which makes sense. You split an empty string, you get an empty list. Okay, so then I try and go. So then I get the result back, and I try and take the -1 element, the last element. There is no last element. I get an error. You get an error. So why am I dealing with this? Well, the answer is it's kind of the agile programming thing. I'm like, well, I shouldn't be passing this empty sentences. I want to know. I just want the error to occur, and I want to deal with that at a much higher level. I don't want to deal with this. If I try checking errors to see something wrong at every stage, I'm just going to spend my whole life doing that. Much better to write the code out, make sure those errors don't happen. If they do, fix them at the high level. Just say, oh, don't pass any empty lines to this thing. It makes my life much easier because also I don't want to be trying to consider empty lines for rhyming. An empty line isn't going to rhyme with anything. It shouldn't be considered at all, so the empty line shouldn't be making it down here. And again, that's one of the things about error checking is, never check for errors you can't recover from. If you can't recover from an error, don't even bother checking, just let it happen, let someone else deal with it. I see so much code with people constantly checking for errors, which I know can't happen because they're also checked for above. I'm like, you're wasting half your time, and it's not just that you're wasting time, you make the code hard to read. One of the things we didn't get to this week, it's not even on my agenda, is a thing called exceptions. It turns out you can actually catch those errors. You throw them, you throw these exceptions and then catch them elsewhere. I just love the idea. At a higher level, So just because you get an error down here doesn't mean all is lost, that your program has to stop functioning. So I'm probably again going on too long about this, but one of the ideas is don't put too much error checking in your program. Put it in as it comes up, as you need it. So that's why I'm not doing any checking there. I'm just assuming you're passing me a good sentence. All right, so great. So now we've already developed a little bit of our calculus of poetry. We can split a sentence up into component words and get that last word, which is two of the things we need. So let's go back. So now we've got that. Let's go back to the rhyming thing. So we start off here. The first thing we want to do is we want to read that rhyme dictionary. One has to spell it. I really regretted using the word rhymes because it turns out it's a word I can't spell properly. Okay, so is this? By the way, the font's gone a little smaller. Is this good for you to all read? Is it too bit small? Would you like it a bit bigger? Come on, say
Sure.
Sure. Good. Say yes. Thank you. Okay, and I'll put this. I think that's it. Anyway, you don't need to see this. All right. So the first thing I need to do, and this is kind of do you have a question? No. I keep seeing when you scratch. And everybody does that when they think. No, people do this naturally when they think too. So I shouldn't be too hyper vigilant, whatever that thing is. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is actually read this file. Now I could have put all this code here. Actually, I didn't have to create a function. You see, I create a function called read rhymes. I could have just put all that code in there in the module, and it would execute right when the module started. It would just run. The reason I did this is twofold. One is for documentation purposes. Just because I called the thing read rhymes, it's now very clear what it's doing. It's reading the rhymes. And again, it's an inferior name. I should have called it read rhyming dictionary. Then you would know. You would know for a fact what it's doing. It's not really a dictionary in the Python sense, I should add, but you would still know what is going on there. But again, I was cheap. I should have looked at it again. So documentation is a big thing. The other point is for testing. Now I've created this thing. I can test it on tiny files. That's how I did. I didn't create the file. I just made a file with two things in it. I tested on that, so I don't have to hard code what's going on there with this. And there's one more question. In fact, who's on the spot? What's the next question you would ask? There's a little mystery somewhere around where my cursor is pointing. This is a real guess. I mean, somewhere around where the cursor is pointing, like that. What's that underscore there?
Yeah, how do we know that?
What's the underscore? Why did I put an underscore there? Again, this is a convention. Very useful one. Underscore says, this is not interesting to anybody outside of this module. This is a local variable to that module. That's what that means. So in other words, things like rhymes, this thing, you notice there's no underscore there, I expect that to be used by people outside. I expect people to understand that. I should document what that means. That's going to be really useful. These things with the underscore, I do not expect those to be used by other people. I don't have to explain myself about those. If I change the code and those vanish, you shouldn't be using them in the first place. They're local. They're things that that make the internal module go. This is really easy because it's a really useful idea because everything that's not useful to the consumer of your module, the guy who's using your module, you put an underscore in front of the name, and that just means to the next guy who's reading, if you're only interested in what's happening, ignore everything that starts with an underscore. And it's really useful for you too because you look at this and you say, okay, there is 20 variables in module and 3 of them do not start with an underscore, so I only need to look at these. It makes life much easier. Again, your code will all work if you don't do this. It just makes your life easier. It makes the program less brittle. Right? That whole concept of brittleness keeps coming out over and over again is because you spend a lot of your life debugging programs, and any work you can do now just by typing to prevent you from doing that huge amount of stressful, like here. You see my thumb here? This is a week of debugging. And that comes from me chewing on my thumb, wondering I couldn't get this tiny detail to work, which I finally figured out last night. Scaring all the dogs when I whipped to figuring out what this terrible little trouble was. It's stressful because, particularly 10 minutes you're okay, but then a day later when you're working on the same thing, you keep doing the same thing, it keeps not working, you don't understand. Stress. No, avoid stress and do little things like naming your variables properly, putting underscores in the, etc., etc. Right. now I've given you the religious thing. You notice there's a lot of religion in this course. So we're going to go through this function. Now this is the thing that reads the rhyming dictionary. And fname, again, I should call this file name. Why didn't I call it file name? I was lazy. You see fname a lot. People are lazy, but most people know what fname means. But I say 3 characters typing. It's stupid. So that should have been file name. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay? So here we go. So we're going to read the rhyming dictionary from a file name. So we start off, you could almost have done this whole thing. Whenever you see something that starts with an empty list, in fact, this font is terrible, and I must apologize. Those look like boxes, but they're really empty lists. Whenever you see something that starts with something like this and appends to it, you could do it with a list comprehension. In this case, it's just too complicated. I couldn't figure out a way to do it. So as before, remember in the previous example I showed you, we used a list comprehension, a generator, or a generator, function, either or, and I did it in one line. Here, I couldn't figure out how to do it in one line, so I did. So you can see it is kind of a matter of taste. So I start off with an empty list of rhymes. I open the file name. Remember I used that with statement because remember the with closes the file, guaranteed right at the end of that statement. And again, that's good practice. Usually it will close it almost immediately after you leave the function, but sometimes you can get caught with that. With that with statement, you know that when I go from this line to this line, the file is closed. So again, it's another one of those things that will just make your life a little happier using these things. So I open the file, I open the function, the file as f, and then each line in that file, I strip the line off, so that's where I get rid of the stripping, remember, gets rid of things at the front and back. And with no arguments, it strips white space from the front and back. And you recall, shall I compare these to a sum day had spaces at the beginning, we don't want those. So I strip this off, and then I say if line. Why is that? So I don't have empty lines. Once I've stripped off all the spaces, if there's nothing left, it's not a line that's going to rhyme. You see, so that's how I prevent, remember I gave that thing, why do I not test? It's because I do that test up there, which is what I want. I'm constantly making these tests where I'm saying getting rid of empty lines that may have appeared in my document to make life easier, so I don't have to do it down below. So here's where it is. And I actually say I'm appending to this list of rhymes a set of the words in that line. So let me go through this. There's quite a lot of things here. Again, I should have called this split words. If I had, this would be easier. So let's go through this from, again, in the Hebrew style, from right to left. This is a line of that dictionary. Like, for example, anatomical, economical, comical. I've split this up using the thing I just showed you, text.split, which should have been called split words, but I was too lazy. Now, what's that set there? Well, I'm interested, I wouldn't, truth to tell us, it would have all worked without the set. But the reason I want the set is because it's more efficient to look at if something's in a set. So I did that, again, it's kind of an instinct. If I'm creating something just for the purpose of looking to see if items are contained in it, I make it a set, as instinct. I'm kind of regretting it now because it's one more thing to explain in this rather complicated thing. So you can just pretend that's not even there. But so what I've done is, but it's there. And that's what, again, it's kind of good habits to get into. So I split the line into component words, make a set out of it, only so I can look things up efficiently, and then put it at the end of this rhyming list. So the question is, why didn't I make an actual dictionary out of this? Well, and the answer is, because what I would then have to do is I have to make a somewhat complicated structure where for each word in the line, I would have a dictionary entry pointing to all the words in that line. I didn't think I could explain it to you effectively, as I might not have right now. So I just made this much easier, and we're going to actually go searching through the dictionary each time. It probably, you wouldn't want to do this if a rhyming dictionary was really big, because every time you looked for a rhyme, you'd have to search through your whole dictionary, like in the real world in a rhyming dictionary. But with Python dictionaries, you don't have to do that. So probably the best choice would have been to have an actual Python dictionary for the dictionary, but I cheaped out there. Such is life. So, and again, you don't have to be, this is kind of more of a guided tour to an opera or something like this. You don't necessarily have to sing all the parts. to understand them here. What I end up at the end of this is a list of sets, and each set is a set of words, all of which rhyme with each other. Okay? So I have, in other words, a list of sets of rhyming words. So, for example, there's going to be one set of rhyming words, anatomical, economical, communical. Another set, day, may. Another set, dimmed, untrimmed, fade, shade. Yeah, is the overall picture of this clear? Any questions? Okay, good. As I said, you can get a chance to play with this later and read through it. And I hope you'll read through it and ask me a lot of questions. You better. All right. So now we're actually getting down to the money shot, as we call it in computer programming. Well, not in computer programming. Okay. So, not very tasteful. Okay. So we have this word. At least I call this something reasonable for change. Words rhyme. Good choice, Tom. Unlike my cheap-ass choices before. Words rhyme. It's very clear. Do these words rhyme? And I actually call them W1 and W2. It's pretty good. Word 1 and word 2. So what am I going to do? Well, I have to now go through that whole list of sets of rhyming words and try and find that word. So I say for rhyme set, I have much better names here. This must have been after I had a cup of coffee or something. For each line, each set in that rhyme, set of rhymes. So in other words, we're going to go through each one of these sets. If my first word is in that set, then these words rhyme only if the second word is in the set. So let me go through this again. I found some word. Let's supposing I look it up and I'm looking for words that are anatomical and comical. I want to see if those rhyme. So if the first word, anatomical, is in the set, then I look and see is that second word, comical, in the set. It is, so I return true. On the other hand, supposing I want to see if anatomical and may rhyme. So I look up there and I say, well, anatomical is, oh, it is in this set. Good. I'm going to return, and then does may appear in the set? The second word? Oh, it does not, so I'm definitely not rhyming. So either way, once I found one word in that set, the first word in that set, I know that the only way I'm rhyming is if the second word is also in that set. Is that clear? Good. Oh, yes.
Can you just take out that second Aleph W2 and rhyme set return false?
You can. Very, very good question. That's absolutely true. Well, and so let me go through with what it does, and then it will work just as well. It was, and again, if I'd done this with a dictionary, I wouldn't need it. I could just look it up in the dictionary. I was kind of stupid, but there we go. I tried to cheap out on this function here at the expense of this function there. Don't. So you're going to see my dirty underwear here. It's terrible. Okay, so here's the thing is, well, why is this? So now I've looked up, let's supposing that the words I'm trying to rhyme are day and anatomical. Okay? So I've got the first word is not in the set. So now, if I look and find so remember the words are day and anatomical. So I'm looking at the first line, and day does not appear in there. Fine. So this one is, we get to the else part of this if statement. So now, anatomical is in that first set. So we know that there is no rhyme. In other words, the word anatomical, the second word in that list, does not appear. It does appear in this rhyme set, but the first one does. It does not. Let me say that again in English. Okay. Again, the examples are, we're seeing this day rhyme with anatomical. So we go to the first set. Day does not appear in that set, but anatomical does appear in that set. So we know that anatomical appears in the rhyme set, but day does not. So we know for a fact that these words do not rhyme. The only way words rhyme if they appear in the same set. But you're absolutely right. You don't need this because you would just go through the whole list and not come up with a rhyme, and you'd still return false at the end, because that's what happens here. We go through the entire rhyme set. If we don't find that the words appear in the same set anywhere, we return false. So I didn't need that clause. I just did that because at that point, I know, I was like, oh, I'm going to short circuit the whole process. If I've just found this thing and there's no rhyme, I'll exit there. Kind of pointless though. It doesn't really help the performance of the thing very much, and it confuses matters. And again, it just points to the fact if I'd used a dictionary, this would have been 2 lines of code. So I won't go too much more into this, except to say, well, yeah. I mean, let me just go over this function again, because it's a tiny bit tricky. Go through each line in here, each set in there. Look for the first word in that set of rhyming words. If it's there, then the words rhyme if the second word is also in the rhyming set. Otherwise, in this case, well, if that second word was in the rhyming set and the first one wasn't, I know it's not a rhyme. And I do this for every single rhyme until I find a rhyme, and if I don't, I return false. Is this reasonably clear? Is this unclear? John, you're scowling.
I'm squinting.
You're squinting. Squinting is good. Squinting is good, and you can actually, as I said, you can download these. You can download these and run these and play these.
That's my point.
That's definitely what the point is. So, but certainly this gives you. And that's the other thing is when you're reading other people's code, you look at this and say, "Oh, words rhyme." As long as it works, you kind of don't even. You can squint your way through the whole function. You have to trust the person is done it right. But if it's working, you're fine. So now we have. This is what I was aiming at with this whole little method, this whole module is lines rhyme. I want to see if 2 lines rhyme, and again I named this properly. And so 2 lines rhyme, and now this is almost like English. 2 lines rhyme if the last words of each line rhyme as words.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's really nice.
That's pretty easy.
That's pretty easy. You see, if you're doing this right, you're going to end up building up a lot of fairly English-like things. Where you're like, okay, words rhyme, it took you a while to get there now, but lines rhyme is really easy because I did the work, getting the last word of a sentence, figuring out how to rhyme a word. And you know, that's why you often see in real world programs, the top level stuff is kind of like English. The bottom level stuff has a lot of gobbledygook like words rhyme there. Okay, so now we've got to the point where we can even tell if 2 words rhyme. So we're halfway there, but now we need to take a look at the number of syllables in each poem. So let's take a look at that. So we have, oh, sorry. Do you have to go?
I have to go. I have to be somewhere at 3.
Oh, I'm so sorry. God, we're really late,
Oh,
aren't we?
that's fine.
Oh, well, we're oh my God. Well, we're almost there.
I watched the video, so.
Yeah, you watched the video.
Thanks.
You now have a starring role. Wave to posterity there. You have to pull the handle up
Okay.
and then push it to close. Great. Okay, so we're almost there in this one. We now need to figure out the number of syllables in words. So how do we figure out the number of syllables in words? I mean, can we guess from the word thing? Maybe if you really had a good understanding of English, but still there'd be words like recipe you would get wrong. I remember having an argument with a friend of mine who's an immigrant. He's like, he called it recite. I'm like, no, it's recipe. He's like, no, the E is silent and it makes the vowel long. I'm like, well, that's true, but it's recipe. Because English is very, so you have to have a list. So again I cheaped out and I have a file where I just look up and I have a list of all the words in there and the number of syllables in each word.
Oh, so you cheated.
Well, it's not really cheap because it's the best way to do it. And plus is you can find people have already done this work for you online. I didn't check that there was rhyming dictionary. I didn't check that there was syllable dictionaries, but I'll bet you there are. The dictionaries for everything. Somebody's already done this work for you and better, and it's somebody who has a best interest in keeping it up to date and fixing it. So you.
So is this in the form of a dictionary?
No, this is just a text file I typed in.
Text file.
It's a text file. It's
So
going to be. It's a good question. It will be a dictionary because this one I remember I did right.
Okay.
But right now it's a text file because I don't want to type in a whole dictionary. I want to hand it to my secretary, if I had one, and said, look, just type in the word and then the number of syllables, please. So it's just a text file, and that's a big advantage to that. I can just edit it. I can go in with an editor, whatever it is, fool around with it. You can, and in fact, my debugging, the code all worked the first time. All of my errors in the coding basically were I had the wrong number of syllables for words. Because I've been doing because I couldn't count, Season was one, anyway, there was I did like 6 or 7 errors when I built this dictionary. So, and again, you can see I have things like, look at this is so pathetic. You want to see pathetic here, is because I was too lame to throw away suffixes, because I didn't want to do extra code. Summer, I had to have entries in this dictionary for summer and summers. if you were doing a real production program, you wouldn't do that. You just clear all the craft away from the word, and then I wouldn't need 2 entries. But I was running out of, it wasn't just I was running out of time. At some point, you just have to decide, as I said, you have to cheap out on something. You can't be deluxe all the way. So you go through and say, okay, this is going to work, and then we'll do the fix next time. So I don't consider this that unreasonable. I have to have 1 extra dictionary entry. So, as I said, I'll bet you there's some way you can download something like this. But this is an example. So now I have in text, in English type text, something that says I can look up and seldom, another word I thought had 1 syllable in it, has actually 2 syllables in it from here. So how do I actually change it to the code? Well, I have similar code to what we did before. I actually kind of cut and pasted it there. Again, we're importing text. Text turns out to be a terrible name as well. I should have called it word splitter, which is what it did. Again, learn from my errors, name everything very clearly. And if you remember the previous one we did like this, which was rhymes, right? If you look at that, remember we have a similar thing where we start off with read rhymes, and we create an empty thing, open it, blah, blah. So it's very similar. I actually cut and pasted my code to do this. It wasn't similar enough that I could actually write one function to do both. I was hoping to do that, but just as well. I didn't. Okay, so this is actually even simpler than before. Why? Because I was smart enough to use a dictionary this time. So we start off here. We have, again, fname. I should have called it file name for you guys. I'm lame. So, but read syllables. This is at least reasonably clear. We read the syllable table. I should have said read syllable table, read syllable dictionary, but there we go. Syllables is an empty dictionary for each line in that file. So I open the file with the with statement, so it's remain closed. Each line in that file, I strip off everything. You notice I'm just always stripping things. And again, if that line is not empty. So you notice I keep doing that. I always keep stripping the spaces from the front and back, and then throwing away anything that's empty. Because you just find you do this, you hit an extra return at the end of your file. One day when you're editing, your secretary does it, so it leaves a blank line in there, and then suddenly your program crashes. So you just get used to doing this throwaway crap. So in other words, I've gone through the file. Every file that's not empty, I split the line, and here I just do a regular split. And you notice I'm doing the multiple assignment there. So I'm assuming here in this that the line is split into 2 separate parts, which is true. I'm clearly not so good at typing with my left hand. Here we go. Voila. And so you can see that each of these lines that aren't empty has exactly 2 words in it. So they all will strip. And the question that you get here is, well, what happens if that's not true? What happens if I put 3 words in a line, or just 1? Well, that's going to be an error. That indicates an error in that file. You've either forgotten to put the number in, or you've got 2 words in a line, or whatever it is. You don't want to. You just want it to die then. You want the program to die and tell you you made a mistake. So I don't even check for that. You see, I take this thing, which will be 2. If I get everything right, it will be 2 parts in that split, because I split it into words. And then I use that multiple assignment to assign these to 2 values. And if it fails, I know it will tell me, it says, you failed, loser. So I get an error, which I got at the beginning at one point because I put a space in somewhere or something. So again, it's don't catch errors you can't fix. Python will tell you where the error is, and then you'll be able to figure out a way to work around this. So I split the word up into 2 parts, the word and the count. For example, that might be short and then a character 1. So now I take that word count and I convert it to a number. A little key thing there. The reason is that all of these string operations generate more strings. But I want to count. I want an actual number. I'm going to be using this and counting out the syllables. I'm going to be adding the syllables to get to where you're going. So this little thing here, I mean, I did this when I was doing it, but I guarantee you're going to forget to do that one day. You'll forget to convert. Python will be really nice to you, and it'll say when you try and edit, oh, sorry, you can't do this. Maybe what would happen is, at the end, maybe you'll add all of the characters representing the syllable length. You get a number instead of like a number, you get something like 1121121 for all the words. You'd still figure it out, because at some point you have to compare it to a number. So that's what this little thing is here. This count, so these are both strings right now, split off. So that might, for example, be shall and one, the string shall and the string one. Now I convert that to the number one. Again, if that's not a number, I'll get an error there. It'll just give me an error, and again, I want that to happen. It means there's a problem in my data file. And that's only going to happen once. If somebody else is using it, if I've made sure the data file works, they will not have a trouble. So these are all things you want to detect early. You want it to drop dead early. Okay, so great. And oh, what's this thing? Oh, brand new concept. Assert. Huh? What's this? Again I'm a very conservative programmer. I hate to have bugs. I want my code not to be fragile. Assertion says the following. If this isn't true, if this statement I'm making is not true, drop dead. Right away. Why do I want to do this? Doesn't it make my program more fragile? Well, no. I want to do this if I've detected some error I can't recover from. I don't want to just be like, oh, maybe it's going to work out. It's not going to work out. I fucked up. I want to die right now. Again, this is an error in the data file. I get to correct this. So I want to find those errors immediately. I don't want them to secretly be there. So when I put that assert statement in there, I'm saying has to be true or I don't want to go on because I've screwed up. And it makes, and I put that in and again, no, it already caught an error there. So what's this assertion saying? It's saying assert word, not in syllables. Well, syllables is my dictionary from words to syllable counts. I want to avoid duplicates in there. Right? Particularly I want to avoid duplicates where at one point I say summer has 2 syllables, and the place I have summer has 3 syllables. But I want to avoid duplicates all told because it's just a bad idea. You know what I mean? Is you go to change something, you only change it in one spot. So the reason I have that assert there is to make sure that my dictionary is in a really good state. If you see people with assertions in your code, you should feel cheerful if you're using that code because it means it's some conservative person who wants to make sure everything is working. So that's what's there. It doesn't actually do anything, and it doesn't do any computation. What it does is just say, this condition must be true at this point, or I'm going to drop dead because I made a mistake. Always a useful thing. Okay, so now we know it's not in there. We actually put it in the dictionary, and we say the number of syllables for that word is this count. Easy, right? So it's very straightforward. We've actually created it. So let's go through this again. Open this file. For each line in the file, split it off, and for all the non-empty lines, split it into the word and the count, convert the count into a number, which remember is a string, and then put it in the dictionary, if it's not already there. If it's already in the dictionary and you're adding it again, that's an error, and you drop dead, because you do not want, you want to make sure that your dictionary is well formed. So great, that's not so bad, and it's just so much easier using a dictionary, and if I'd been smart, I would have done that for the other one, but. Okay, we read this, and then we get, again, is the payload, no, I don't think that's as bad as money shot. The result of this code is often at the end, the most interesting stuff comes at the end. Again, it's kind of the Hebrew thing, except I don't think they read Hebrew from the bottom up. I don't know if any human languages read from the bottom up. But in programming it is because usually the thing you're doing at the bottom depends on all the things above it. Line syllables, and that's actually pretty clear. The number of syllables in a line. And so we say, oh, and I cheated here. Perhaps I shouldn't have. We say, let's go through this. This is again now where you can see that we get to build up things from stuff we've already created. Let's start off. We say for W is in text split line. Remember that split? This should have been called split word. I've split this up into words, made everything lowercase. I've cleaned everything up and I have this nice split. So now this is for each full word in the line. And then I say syllables dot get W1. Well, I'm cheating there. I'm making life too easy on myself. I just should have done, I really should, in fact, well, here's what I'm doing with this is, the get was in, I didn't teach this, but it was in one of the courses, in one of the exercises. Get looks something up in a dictionary, and if it's not there, returns a default value. This statement basically says the following, and it's hidden too. This is bad. Learn from my mistakes here. If I don't know about a word, it has one syllable. That's what this says. If I look this up, so I look up a word in the syllable dictionary, if it's not there, return in one syllable.
Why would you want that?
Because I'm an idiot.
Oh.
It's bad. Well, it's bad, particularly in this case where I'm really insisting that I know everything. I should not have done that. It would all still work.
Okay.
So in other words, I don't know what, no, I'll tell you what I was thinking is when I initially did it, I realized that almost all the words in my poems were one syllable.
Uh-huh.
So I thought, oh, I'll make a dictionary with just things of greater than one syllable. I got partway through and I thought, that's stupid. So, and that's a legacy from that.
Okay.
So, that's poor. I should have just, in fact, I'm going to change it. Let's see. I'm going to change it. We'll find out if my code is as good as I think it is. So, let's just say, no, I don't want that. I'm going to look up the word. I'm going to look up the word, and I'm going to die if the word isn't there. So we're going to find out if if I did this all right very quickly. So, and again, you want to fail. You want to fail if you don't know what's going on, and I was foolish not to do that. So let's go back and find this easier, more solid statement here. Okay, split the line up into words. Look up the number of syllables for that word, and sum all those syllables together. Very straightforward. So that's the number of syllables. Basically, it's saying the number of syllables in a line is the sum of the number of syllables in each word. Really not so hard. Is this good?
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. So we're basically there, almost. So we have all the parts now. We can tell how many syllables there are on a line. We can tell if two lines rhyme, and that's kind of all we need. Except we kind of have to put the parts together. And I have to remember what I call this. And I'm sorry we're keeping so far over time. We're almost there. Okay. Oh, sorry. I called it. What did I call it? Poem. Easy enough. Okay. Here's the actual poem. And now, so how? The first question is, how do I know about a specific poem? Well, I just set up dictionaries. Again, you notice you just use dictionaries for everything. In fact, initially I made some class or data structure or other complicated thing. I'm like, no. Use a dictionary. That's one of the nice things about Python. All the time I'm looking at people's code and I'm like, no, throw this page away and use a dictionary. And I'm like, but don't I need, no, the dictionary will do that for you. So here, this is a dictionary definition of two different types of poems. We have limericks and sonnets. Let me make this a little bigger because there we go. We have limericks and sonnets. So let's just look at the limerick first. So poem types is this great big dictionary. Not that big, but bigger than fits on one page anyway. So and it's got an entry here, limerick, and that's another dictionary. So this is a dictionary inside a dictionary. There's no reason we can't do that. You can put anything in a dictionary you like. Anything for the value. Remember, the keys to a dictionary have to be... Anybody? Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
What?
Immutable. Yeah, you're all right.
Okay.
Oh, is that what I thought that's what you said.
I don't know what everybody else said.
It's fine. Well, I thought you were all saying about the same thing. So, so basically, remember the keys can't be changeable. Numbers are good, strings are good, tuples are good because they're immutable. Lists aren't good because you don't want to change your keys in the dictionary because you have to move the thing around. You don't want that to happen. So here you can see that we have this dictionary contains an entry for limerick, which is another dictionary, which has two parts: rhymes. And this is a list of lines that have to rhyme. Now remember, of course, in Python, we always start counting at zero. In almost all programming languages, you start counting at zero. And let's take a look at XP. Let's take a look at that limerick as an example. Voila. Okay. So you can see what I'm saying here is in this little bit of code here. Oh, this isn't code. This is data. Much better way to go. In this dictionary here, I'm saying rhymes is a list, it's a tuple of tuples. Could be a list of lists, it's kind of irrelevant. I just use it because I never want to change this once I've done it. And this says, you don't know this yet until you've read code that's below it, but I'm explaining it to you. This is saying that here's a rhyme. Line 0 and 1 must rhyme. That's line 0. Remember we said everything at the counting 0, that's line 1. And then we're also saying, oh, lines 2 and 3 must rhyme. And this is line 2, the third line, sorry. And line 3 is this one. And these two rhyme. And then also line 1 and 4, economical and comical, those also have to rhyme. The question you may ask is, oh, well, maybe should I maybe have said 0, 1, and 4 rhyme? Maybe. I don't know. I just made that decision to have only rhymes in pairs, because that's how I've defined rhymes so far, as rhyming pairs. So I say, okay, so this defines the rhyme scheme of a limerick. The first two lines rhyme, the next two lines rhyme, the last line rhymes with the first ones. Okay, and now we have the number of syllables. Now it turns out, of course, that when I got to this point, I realized that it's not true that there's a that it turns out you can have multiple, when I went through limericks, it turns out you can have different, it's not so fixed. You know, there was a young man from Nantucket, has fewer syllables than there was a young man from Verdun, both of which are classic limericks, so limerick-like things. So it turns out I needed to have a range of syllables. And I found this at the last minute. I was literally, oh shit, but it wasn't so bad. I didn't swear for the video, that was a mistake. So what this says is, the first line of a limerick has to have somewhere between 8 and 11 syllables, inclusive. And the second line has to have 8 and 11 syllables. And then the third line and the fourth line are 5 to 7 inclusive, and then 8 to 11. So that, I just defined in data, not in code, but in data, the structure of a limerick. The reason I did it in data because it's much, much easier. I don't have to write code for each new type of poem. I do, and it's just a list of numbers. I could put it in a text file and read this. If I had thousands of poem types, I could even possibly convince my secretary to do this. Although it's getting a bit obscure, but you know, so it's just always better to put your decisions in data. Data, you don't get bugs in your data. You do get bugs in your data, but it's much easier to debug and all this sort of thing. All right, and then we have the same thing. I'm going to quickly go through this. Almost done. Is here we have the same thing for a sonnet. We have a list of rhymes, first and the third, second, right? We have a list of rhymes, we have a list of syllables. It turns out that the sonnets are very, very, very picky on the number of syllables. They're all the same number of syllables. Okay, and now we're done, almost done. We have this one last piece of code. So it fits in one page. Brilliant. I'm modest too. Okay, so and this is the last thing. Is poem type, and then I'm going to demonstrate it for you just in case. So is poem type? So the question is a given poem a poem of a given type? So for example, you might say, is poem type and then such and such limerick. So the first thing we do is we look up a rule from that poem types table. So for example, if this poem type were limerick, we look up that limerick, we look up that whole set of rules we got there from above. So we start by looking that up, and then we say, the first thing we do is say, does the poem have the right number of lines? So I can tell the number of lines. You notice I didn't include a number of lines in the poem, but the reason is I can tell the number of lines from this thing, because in here, you see I have a number of syllable counts for each line. So I know from reading here that there are 5 lines, that limericks must have 5 lines. Is that clear? Right? So I don't need to put that in. I don't need to put it in. It's a good idea not to have redundant data. I could have had a separate thing saying lines there, but what happens if I say I have 5 lines of syllables and the line count is 4? Well, something's wrong there, and I didn't have to do that. I mean, I don't. You should never give yourself the ability to make errors if you can possibly avoid it. All right. So basically, I know that my poem isn't of the right type if it doesn't have a number of lines for the syllable. Doesn't have the right number of lines. And you can see that I actually return an error message. Generally, in the real world, you probably actually throw an exception. We haven't dealt with those, so I decided not to do this. So I build up an error message that says, poem has this many lines, that's the length of the poem, but actually, I wanted this many lines. So that's really clear. And I think I put this in because when I was debugging this, it would just say, it's not a limerick. I'm like, it is a limerick! Damn you! So when I put in something, told me why it wasn't a limerick, suddenly I was able to realize, it was almost always that I was getting the syllable counts wrong on words. But I had no way to figure that out. It was frustrating for about 45 seconds because, I'm used to fixing this sort of thing. But the thing is, I guarantee you, as you get better at this, what happens is you just approach problems that are more hard for you to solve, and you still get frustrated. You're going to be frustrated up and down the line. That's why you build in these little rules here. So then now what we do is the following. Remember, so we now go through the rhyming rules. Remember, those rhyming rules are pairs of numbers. Let me just show you, actually. remember so the rhyming rules, here's a rule of rhyming rules. Right, so you can see here we have 0, 1, and 2, so we're first going to check to see the rhymes. I should have put a comment in there. I should have put a comment in there saying, check rhyme scheme is correct. Let me put a comment in there because I'm just embarrassed to show my dirty laundry here. Ooh, should not have done that back in purpose. Oh, that's right, fix this. Check that the rhyme scheme is correct. All right. And what do we do? We go through the rhyme scheme here. Now we see for line 1, line 2 in rule. Remember that we had that rule from here. Rhymes. So we look up that value, rhyme value. Again, we're unpacking these two values. So for the poem we're looking at now, the very first line thing we're going to do, we're going to actually, line 1 is going to be 0, and line 2 is going to be 1. We've actually looked up the indices, the numbers of 2 lines we expect to rhyme in these poems. So we say, okay, we're expecting the first 2 lines to rhyme. First 2 lines to rhyme. So we're expecting these first 2 lines to rhyme on this poem. So how do we know if they rhyme? Well, we did all this work already. This is where we've been at for the last while. We know, we just have this nice thing, all of this code encapsulated. We say, if these lines rhyme, poem line 1 and poem line 2, if they do not rhyme, we just print something saying, line this and this don't rhyme. So all this work is, you can see it's paying off. It's something that's kind of like English here, where you say, for these lines, for these 2 lines in the poem, they're supposed to rhyme according to our rhyme scheme. We check to see if they rhyme. They don't. We're done. All right. So now we've actually checked the poem rhymes as advertised. So all we need now to do is to check to see that the poem has the right number of syllables. So again, now we're going to do the same thing again, where we actually go through, and there's this thing called enumerate. I gave this to you, I think, in one of your classes. Did I give this to you in an exercise? I'm pretty sure I did.
I remember enumerate.
Yeah, enumerate. All it does is it's really handy. It gives you, when you go through an array, or a list, sorry, you often, and we've got like 20 more seconds here. I'm sorry, I'm going way over time. I knew this would be long. You often need to get both the line in the poem, the line of both the element in the array and its index at the same time. You often need to do that. Enumerate does that for you. Really handy. So now, at least I named things properly. I said for line number and the bounds. So remember the bounds. Let's go up to here. This is the bounds isn't perhaps a good name, but for example, the bounds. I call these the bounds. Bounds. You need at least 8 syllables, at most 11 syllables. So we say for line number and bounds in enumerate this, we're going to start off with line 0. So the 0th line of the poem has to have at least 8 and at most 11. So I then unpack this. Again, I'm unpacking this. You see, I'm doing 2 unpackings. In fact, it's in the initial code. I did these all in one line. I looked at this. I thought, I'll never be able to explain this. So I split this up there. So now least in this first case is 8 syllables. It has at least 8 syllables, at most 11. Now again, I've done the heavy lifting before. Syllable count for that for the line isn't. I can just look it up. I call syllables.line syllables, which I described earlier for that line in the poem. You see, that's why I need the line number, so I can look at the line number of the poem. If it's less than the least number of syllables, I return an error. This line has this many syllables, which is not enough. If a line has more than that, I can present another error. Oh, wrong window. And that's it. I do nothing otherwise. I just do nothing. You're like, oh, wait a sec, you didn't return anything at the bottom of that function. You notice this? Well, remember none? If you don't return anything from a function, it just returns none. And that's really handy, because remember, none is falsy. But I'm returning here an actual string if there's an error. So let's actually try it. Finally, after all this, I can actually try and figure out if there's a poem. After all this, let's go to shell. Let's exit this. Quit. And let's and now I'm going to ignore what I'm doing here for the moment. Just setting things up. So what I'm going to actually first I'm going to import poem. Right. Remember I made that change before? So it did all that syllable counts and stuff. And so far I haven't made any mistakes. So let's now, so I didn't make that error, I made that change without error, I hope. So let's try and read the limerick. Let's start off by doing this. I'm going to say limerick equals open, and remember this is all stuff from a previous class as well. We're going to open the limerick, and we're going to read the whole thing, right? And we can see there's our whole poem. And again with the backslash ends for this. So finally, I don't remember the name of my function, so again I'm going to look at when I do that. I'm going to look up the name and we can say, poem is poem type. And it's bad Tom, look at this. Do you see here? Only one of these functions is poem type. That's the only the only thing I'm interested in is exporting that one function is poem type. These two should have underscores in front of them to indicate, no, I'm not interested as a consumer, but I was lazy. I'll try and pick some of these up before we go, but what the hell, you get to see my thing. So let's try this out. Poem.is, first let's try something like, let's try a poem type that doesn't, limerick, sorry. Let's try a poem type, let's first just see, is it a limerick? Now, let's hope. Silly me, sorry. Yeah, no, it was my own fault. I should have done dots. In my demo, it is. Yeah, but I would have actually done it. What I should have done is actually the following, even better. How embarrassing. I did do this as a demo. Okay, don't read lines. That's probably better, right? That'll lead as the lines. Because, you think of poems, bunch of lines. Voila. Oops. Much better. Now we go here. But you see it was a very clear error. Poem has 164 lines. I just obviously knew, okay, that's got to be the number of characters. So let's try this out. Limerick. Okay, is it a limerick? What's it do? It does nothing. So that was the way I set up nothing is no error. Let's try to see if it's a sonnet. This is the acid test. Poem has 5 lines, not 14 lines. I could try to change the limerick. Like, for example, I could say, I'm not going to do this because we're so short on time. If I change this around and change the rhyme scheme, it would present this all for you. It would actually tell you where the rhyme scheme failed in this sort of thing. But one more, just to prove I got it. Let's do here, we're going to say sonnet is open. Shall. Remember this one's a bit trickier. There's more punctuation and there's spaces and things. So it's a bit more of a test. And then we're going to say poem is a sonnet, and let's hope we say yes, that'll work. Voila.
Nice.
I know, prison. So voila, that's the whole thing. So this is a longer than I hoped. It's a somewhat real world application. It does honest to goodness things. You can see how I build things up from the bottom to the top. You don't necessarily, I'm presenting it to you from the bottom, from the top. You don't necessarily build programs that way. In Python, it's really convenient to do that. You build your tiny tools, you test them with the command line. That's how I did all this stuff. I figured out how to do words rhymed first, and I know that I had to build a dictionary. Then once I knew how words rhymed, I knew how lines rhymed. That is, once I learned how to split lines into words, which turned out to be something I hadn't thought of, but I came up with something to do that. And then I also needed to figure out syllables. I did that by figuring out syllables for each word, figuring out, and then adding together the syllables per word. And then I go and match against that whole schema for poems, and I'm done. That's it. Questions? Probably. It was long, that was long. So this is actually, real world programs are like this. Real world things are definitely like this. Can I ask, did any of you get the anti-gravity joke? Did you get that far?
It didn't work in my...
2 point, you're at 2.6, right? From the assignment, did any of you get that?
Haven't done it yet.
I looked up what it was supposed to do.
That was last week, I don't.
Okay, so let me see Python. Do I have Python 2.7 on this machine?
No, I think,
I could have installed it. Oh, what a shame. What it does, well, I'll show you. I'll reassign you the question. You should get it. It's a real laugh, I have to say.
really? Okay.
Yes, basically,
Okay, got that.
I won't tell you what it is. You should. I'll reassign that question to you. I expected to have assignments to give out at the end. No, I didn't. I optimistically expected to have the assignment to give out, but no, I have to add. I have to make changes. I have to add a bunch of stuff to it. I'll still have it probably. I'll have it by tomorrow night.
Cool.
Further questions? Thanks.
Thank you.
You have the square?
What's this?
Do you have the square?
I do.
You need to get it for last.